What is up, everybody? We have some information for this Friday, maybe some actually important information to discuss regarding Stephen Sharif, Intrepid Studios, and TFE Games Holdings, which we have discussed in the past. The first thing I want to do, though, before we begin, is mention that I am not going to show any of the actual lawsuit in this. We have had videos from other content creators taken down, and I really have no interest in being struck. So I will put a link in the description below as to where you can go find some of this information for yourself. But I won't be showing any of it myself. Also, this is not related to Stephen Sharif and his lawsuit that he's been stating he will do. We've not yet seen any of that. So as we begin, I want to be very clear. Everything that I am about to discuss comes directly from court filings. These are allegations made by TFE Games Holdings in a civil lawsuit, and they are not proven facts. A complaint is one side of a legal dispute. And at the time of this recording, Stephen Sharif has not yet filed a response. And we will absolutely cover his response in full once that is filed. But the court has not ruled on these allegations, and this video is for informational and journalistic purposes. So what was filed? Well, on February 9th, 2026, TFE Games Holdings filed a lawsuit in Clark County District Court, Nevada. And then on February 11th, they filed an amended complaint. The defendants named are Stephen Sharif, John Moore, and then additional unnamed defendants. So what is or who is TFE Games Holdings? Well, according to the complaint, TFE Games Holdings is a Delaware LLC. It claims to be the successor in interest to Intrepid Studios. And here's a key point. TFE says it became the owner of Intrepid's assets through something called an Article 9 private sale under the Uniform Commercial Code. And let me briefly explain that. So what is an Article 9 sale? Well, Article 9 of the UCC governs secured loans. If a company defaults on a secured loan, the secured creditor can foreclose on the collateral. And the collateral can include a lot of things, bank accounts, intellectual property, equipment, receivables, basically all business assets. TFE claims it foreclosed on all of Intrepid's assets through this process. So what does TFE claim it acquired? Well, the complaint lists sweeping categories, and I'm not going to read them all, but they include things like equipment, inventory, fixtures, accounts receivable, deposit accounts, cash, investment property, letters of credit, copyrights, trademarks, and importantly, all books and records. This essentially is everything. So who are the defendants? Well, Stephen Sharif is listed as the former CEO of Intrepid Studios and a current shareholder. And John Moore is listed as a former employee or contractor and shareholder, and allegedly transferred some shares to Stephen Sharif. The central dispute is company records, and this is the first major claim. So TFE alleges that Stephen Sharif is currently in possession of critical company records, and that these include receipts and invoices from the past 3 years, payroll records going back to 2016, and account access credentials. Specifically, the complaint actually attaches 3 exhibits. I'm not going to read through them all here, nor describe them all. Some are a little bit personal, but Exhibit 1 is technology platforms, lists things like AWS, Steam, GitHub, Epic Games, OpenAI, things like that, dozens more. Exhibit 2 were bank and credit accounts, things like Chase accounts and PayPal and Stripe and American Express. And Exhibit 3 were vendor and expense entries. So examples listed here were things like cash withdrawals, Airbnb, personal withdrawals, airlines, and things like that. TFE alleges Stephen Sharif has refused to turn over this information. So why does TFE say this matters? Well, they argue that without the company records, they cannot wind down Intrepid's business, pay employees, or fulfill WARN Act obligations. We already did a full video on the WARN lawsuits. I'll link that below in the description, so you can certainly watch that separately if you want and haven't yet. The complaint makes a very specific allegation. So it states that on January 18th, 2016, Stephen Sharif allegedly received notice that a secured creditor would be taking a $3.5 million Steam receivable. TFE claims that this $3.5 million receivable was being relied upon to pay employees and creditors. and that Stephen Sharif allegedly did not share this notice. And then they claimed that on January 19th, 2026, Sharif resigned as CEO. Again, these are all allegations. So TFE further alleges that there was approximately $17.4 million in misappropriation. So they claim that, again, approximately $17.4 million were misappropriated in unauthorized personal and excessive expenses between January 1st, 2016 and January 31st, 2026. They claim this included personal loans to shareholders without documentation, direct transfers to shareholders, transfers to miscellaneous accounts with no business purpose, personal credit card expenses reimbursed by Intrepid, payments exceeding salary and earnings, and payments to family and friends, and payments to John Moore and other investors. They also allege Intrepid bank accounts were commingled with Stephen Sharif's personal accounts in QuickBooks, and also commingled with John Moore's accounts. And commingling means mixing company funds with personal funds. So the complaint further states that Stephen Sharif caused Intrepid to issue approximately $12 million in reimbursements for purported business expenses, but TFE alleges that there was no supporting documentation provided regarding those reimbursements. They also make the allegation that there was about $130 million raised and that $10 to $20 million of this is questioned. So this is one of the most significant claims. The complaint alleges that approximately $130 million was raised for Ashes of Creation, and that between $10 million and $20 million of that was not used for development, and instead alleges that it was used for personal expenses or other unlawful uses. Again, this is an allegation made by TFE. And then there's the San Diego property. So the complaint also alleges that Intrepid took out a loan to purchase real property in San Diego. They allege that Stephen Sharif identified investments as revenue to obtain the loan, and that the property was sold for about $8.5 million. The loan was allegedly not repaid to Intrepid, and they are alleging that Stephen Sharif retained the profits and that John Moore allegedly benefited as a spouse. This forms part of the unjust enrichment claim. So the complaint also alleges shareholder loan claim unpaid, and against John Moore, they make the allegation and claim of about $6.6 million in shareholder loans, again, allegedly unpaid. TFE claims these are enforceable contracts that were breached. And then there are further or additional transfer claims as well. Against Stephen Sharif, there is an allegation of about $4.8 million in undocumented transfers. And against John Moore, there's an allegation of about $5.9 million in undocumented transfers, and also allegations of double payment for the same services. So the lawsuit makes several legal claims that are asserted. So the complaint includes breach of fiduciary duty against Stephen Sharif, breach of contract against both Stephen Sharif and John Moore, unjust enrichment against Stephen Sharif and John Moore, and also injunctive relief or claim and delivery, conversion, and attorney's fees. And they're seeking general damages, special damages, attorney's fees, pre and post judgment interest, and injunctive relief. Again, the timeline that were painted here in January 18th, 2026, there was this alleged Steam receivable notice. Then on January 19th, Stephen Sharif resigned as CEO of Intrepid Studios. On January 31st, we get the warn notices issued. And then on February 2nd and 3rd, terminations. And then February 9th is when this complaint was filed, with the February 11th being an amended complaint. So it's important to note that as of this recording, Stephen Sharif has not filed a response, and the court has not made any findings. These are all unproven allegations. If and when a response is filed, we will review it in full, we will present it, and we'll update the record. So what this means, well, the lawsuit alleges financial mismanagement, misappropriation, failure to turn over corporate assets, improper transfers, and personal benefit from company funds. But again, these are allegations and are not findings. And the legal process for this really has just begun. So in closing, this is a developing situation. This is one side of the dispute, and the response will definitely matter, and the court's rulings will also matter. and we'll be here following it every step of the way. So as we continue to document the story, if you want to keep up to date, then you might as well subscribe or follow. And as soon as we do hear from Stephen regarding his lawsuit, we'll talk about it. But until then, I'll see you around.